Each of us has a unique career story to tell. For some, these fly high like rocket launches. For others, they're more like the game of chutes and ladders, with advances and setbacks along the way. Either way, we learn countless lessons from these experiences. And that's what we put into the spotlight here at Career Sessions Career Lessons. Join discussions featuring a variety of guests sharing their stories of ups and downs, as well as the secrets of their success and what drives them to continue moving forward. We break down the tools and resources that will help you establish your dream career and realize your professional goals. Here's your host, J.R. Lowry.
Hi, this is J.R. Lowry, and welcome to Career Sessions. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Alter, who I first got to know when her husband Michael and I were working together back in the late 1990s. Sarah is currently the CEO of NextUP, a growing 15,000-member, 900 corporate partner movement transforming the retail, consumer goods, technology, manufacturing, and financial services industries. Specifically, NextUP is focused on creating opportunities for more women leaders and a more collaborative, flexible, and diverse workplace for everyone. Sarah is an accomplished executive herself. Before taking the helm at NextUP 5 years ago, she spent 2 years as Chief Marketing Officer with General Growth Properties, an operator of shopping malls. Prior to that, she worked in a variety of roles for Discover Financial Services, and earlier roles were at the online retailer Quill and at Staples, including some time spent working in the UK. Sarah is also active in the nonprofit world, supporting the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business Venture Challenge. She is also a member of the Economic Club of Chicago. She has earned a wide range of industry recognition for her work at NextUP, Discover, and Quill, including being named a notable women's executive by Crain's Chicago Business in 2020. She serves on the advisory boards of the Illinois State Lottery and Maverick Digital, and she hosts her own internet radio show and podcast called Advancing All Women, which airs each Friday on Voice America and has over 60,000 listeners. Sarah earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Northwestern and her MBA from Harvard Business School. She and her husband, Michael, live in the Chicago area and are the parents of 3 adult children. Sarah, welcome. It's great to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you today. Thrilled to be here.
Great. I'm looking forward to our conversation and hearing more about what you're doing now. So let's start there, actually. So talk about NextUP and what it's all about. And I know you've been there for, I think, 5 years or so. So it'd be great just to get an overview of that to start with.
Yeah, it'll be 5 years, June 5th. So in the next couple of days. NextUP is my why, both my personal and professional why. It's a 501c3, so it's a nonprofit. And our mission is to advance all women in business. And we go about doing that in 3 primary ways. The first is we provide leadership development. And it's, women aren't broken. They do not need to be fixed. But, we can always be better leaders. And knowledge clearly has a shelf life. And we all learned just in these last 2 years alone, right? That, we had to lead in a very different way. And so we provide, assessments, coaching, structured, content and curriculum and workshops. The second is that we provide networking. And so we have over 15,000 members and growing, and we engage in communities that are volunteer-led in 22, different locations across the United States and Canada. And that networking really ends up benefiting all, both, personally and professionally. And then the third, and probably the more important way, has been through providing content and curriculum and strategy for C-suite leaders and organizations. We partner with over 900 companies, half the Fortune 500, and we provide them with guidance in how to bring diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging alive in their cultures and in their strategies.
How does your model work? I mean, obviously the corporate people presumably are paying some sort of fees to you. Do your 15,000 members pay fees, or is it just free for them and paid by the corporate members?
Yeah. No, so for us, it's clearly a B2B, capital B to capital B, and then we've got a to C, tiny C.
Hmm.
The lion's share of the revenue that you need margin to deliver mission. So the lion's share of the revenue that we deliver is through our corporate partnerships. So these, we partner with over 900 companies, but there's actually probably about 130 who, that whole 80-20 rule that really invest in us extensively. Yeah. And by investing in us, we can coach and guide them in how to provide the right culture and how to provide the right, training or development or networking, and most importantly, creating that environment where all women feel like they have every opportunity to be as equally successful, as men. And it really spills over into diverse communities as well. So yeah, we'll negotiate a partnership. We have phenomenal partners like Coke and PepsiCo and Walmart and Target and Google and Microsoft and, you name it. And we'll work with them to pull together investments, not only at that individual level in their female leaders, but also in their male leaders. And one of the bigger initiatives that we had rolled out just this past year and a half was a whole community and journey called Beyond Allies. And it teaches you how to be a better ally. So we've had a number of our partners invest in developing their male allyship community. And then on top of that, then there are corporate programs like Beyond Allies that can also be spread across the entire organization and done at a larger scale, if you will.
Yeah, I know I see a sort of, I won't say a gigantic number, but certainly there's a growing number of for-profit institutions out there kind of working on promoting, Absolutely. Women development. Chief would be one that comes to mind immediately, but it's certainly not the only one. How do you think about, the role that you play relative to them?
Sure. Yeah, no. And you know what? We were born out of necessity. A number of other, peer nonprofit-based organizations, as well as these for-profit organizations, exist out of necessity, right? And, sadly, we're needed. The ideal day will be the day where I am no longer needed and my organization isn't either. But sadly, that's also a far way away.
Yeah.
So I don't ever feel like we compete with any of these organizations because we all seem to have found like our competitive differentiation or our, unique, strategic value in delivering impact. And if you compare us with the Chief, I'm actually a member of Chief.
Are you?
And yeah, and Chief serves that C-suite to its name, that C-suite, community of female leaders. And they provide, content, they provide curriculum, and they provide, networking. NextUP would serve these C-suite leaders, but they would serve these C-suite leaders by serving their teams. So these C-suite leaders would come to us and we would lay out what that roadmap is for leadership development, for networking, for, employees fresh out of college, all the way up to that, VP level where your chief is targeted probably above that level and beyond in the C-suite. So, we can coexist happily and, ideally it's, everybody when they come in doesn't duplicate or create redundancy, but they hit an opportunity or a gap so that once we add up all of our great work and impact together, we can truly start to deliver progress.
I know you'd spent like 20 plus years in the kind of retail consumer packaged goods world and a bit in financial services when you were working at Discover. So what led you to NextUP? How did you decide to make the jump from the for-profit world into the nonprofit world? Social enterprise world, if you will?
I wish I could sit here and say that, I had laid out my strategic career path and I knew at one point in time, it was a fluke.
Yeah.
At that point in time, I was looking for my next adventure, and a recruiter that I had always kept in touch with, both personally and professionally, reached out and she said, "Hey, I know you want to get a title beyond the CMO title that I had at the most recent job at that point in time." And at that point in time, I was also looking at like VC and PE type opportunities. She said, "It's not a for-profit, it's not a startup, but it is, it's a nonprofit whose mission is centered in and around gender equality and, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging." She said, "I know you're passionate about that. And even more importantly, it's an opportunity to really rebuild and scale, a tremendous, mission." And what appealed to me about it was a bit of a hybrid, because I felt like half the job was nonprofit, mission focused, but the other half was partnering with these Fortune 500 companies and guiding them strategically in how they could bring, DEIB to life in their cultures and embedded in their strategies and their DNA. And, when I started, I shared with the board, I said, "Hey, I'm going to run this like a business, a startup business, but with a very strong and passionate mission." And there was this incredible article in HBR that one of my team members sent to me. And it really spoke to what we needed to do, which was we had to be refounders. What was prior called New Network of Executive Women, and we've rebranded and it's now NextUP. But at the time, this was 5 years ago, and New had existed for at least 16 years at that point.
Right.
It was an incredible community spread across the United States and across, corporate America and the corporate world in Canada. But it wasn't poised for the future.
Yeah.
And it also, it was not indicative of what we were preaching. It wasn't a diverse community. There weren't different generations. There weren't both men and women. There weren't members from the LGBTQIA plus community. There weren't as many BIPOC members. And so for me, it was the bigger epiphany was, one, we need to diversify and contemporize our community and mission. And then two, even more importantly, it wasn't about fixing women. It was about empowering them, and it was about fixing the cultures and the, organizations and their lack of support, that could set women up for every equal opportunity to be successful.
How did you go about, you had a long career history of time in the kind of digital online world, which I'm sure has been relevant in leading NextUP. But how did you go about the transformation that you're describing, the refounding, as you call it?
Well, for me, the first step was, and it was there were like 130 other people that they were considering for this job, and so to interview for it, you had to come up with a plan. And for me, the core component of my plan was, you need to diversify the industries that you're serving. And so when New, the old organizational name, was founded, it found its roots in primarily retail and CPG. What was key to me was, where was the growth? Where was the money? And at the time that I joined, 5 years ago, there were a lot of challenges. Retailers were shutting their doors. Right. CPG companies were, shutting down or acquiring each other and merging. And, there wasn't as much growth as you would hope for. And so budgets were challenged. And because sadly, not all leaders and companies back then were equally convinced and committed to investing in this aspect of their culture, there were challenging conversations of, funds drying up. So my recommendation was then let's go into the markets. So go into technology, let's go into financial services, go to service providers, go to the vendors, that serve the retailers and the CPG companies. We're even now in pharma. We've got a huge representation of pharma. We've got a huge representation now of manufacturing. We've clearly diversified the companies and the industries that we serve. That was that first step. The second step was then expanding the services and the product that we could sell. So it wasn't just about serving individual female leaders and providing face-to-face networking. It was about, okay, let's start to engage more men. Let's start to diversify, other leaders who are joining us, BIPOC leaders, members of the LGBTQIA plus community, bringing in newer generations. And then even more importantly, and it played out even more so, over the last 2 years, where our business model was 95% face-to-face. And we had to flip the switch overnight. Yeah. So we went virtual. And thankfully, we had invested in our digital community. We had invested in our social, media communities and platforms. And more recently, over the past year, was where we invested in the radio show and the podcast.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because as we all saw, people were zoomed out.
Yeah.
They had that virtual fatigue. And the first year, everybody was clamoring for direction, for sanity, right? For any type of knowledge that would guide them through this journey.
Yeah.
And then it started to slowly kind of die down, and we'd have 1,000 people on a Zoom, and then we had 500, and now we're lucky if we have 250, and right. We just got a lot of feedback that, don't want to be on yet another Zoom. So that's where someone had reached out on LinkedIn, and it was Voice America. And they said, hey, you should, you got a lot of great content. Let's do a radio show. So we started it, and then the rest is history.
60,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
That's amazing. When did you start this? It wasn't that long ago, right?
No, you know what? It was a year ago. And I've found that magic formula is I'll typically have 3 guests on.
Okay.
We cover the topics that are, top of mind for any one of our members or our partners and their leaders, so anything that's typically more DEIB, related. And what we do is we'll bring in a thought leader, an expert, and then we'll bring in 2, leaders who are actually, bringing it to life, making it happen in their own organizations. So for example, last week we did a show on mental health, and in the spirit of May is Mental Health Awareness Month.
Right.
We brought on an author who's a former board member, Andy Dunn. And he wrote a book, Building a Startup, Burning Out and Losing My Mind While I Did It. Mm-hmm. And he shares his personal journey of coming to terms as an adult with, he is bipolar mm-hmm. 1. And so he talks all about his journey, both personally and professionally, and then wrote a book to, share so that others can benefit, from his own journey. Along with him, we had a female leader who's a therapist, and she shared her own personal journey with her son, and then just advice and guidance for leaders in terms of what they should be providing when it comes to mental health, insurance and services and time off, for employees. Doing things like building a business resource group that focuses in and around mental health. So there's a community where people feel safe and they can come to for advice and guidance. The following week, we did a show on grief. And there's sadly, there's a whole lot of grief in our world these days. And we had a woman who has her own podcast, Girl, We Need to Talk. Charity Bailey, and she is focused on guiding individuals through grief. We had a mental therapist who focuses in and around grief, and then we had a member and a partner who had just lost her grandmother and was grieving, that family member loss. And so we try to cover all these different topics. We've got one coming up in June. It's Pride Month. So we're going to talk about advice and guidance in terms of how you transition and announce at work that you are identifying as a different gender now. You're using different pronouns, and the time has come that you're about to make it happen. And so we're partnering with HRC, Human Rights Council. They'll be our thought leader. And then we're going to bring a couple of individuals where that was the journey they had. Yeah.
Cool.
It's been quite an adventure.
Yeah. And presumably you've got people on the team who help, pick topics and book your guests and all of that. Yeah. I'm my own booking agent. So
you know what? It's much admiration to you, Mr. Lowry. Yeah. I have two people who are kind enough to help me. And they help me, schedule and coordinate. And then I've got an incredible writer, Maria Cirillo helps out, and then Angie Bice, and they both help me out. And it's fun brainstorming the topics, because it's, every time I go out and I meet someone new now, I'm like, I need to have you on the show.
Yeah. You do start thinking like that.
Right. I feel so bad. I'm like, I should just enjoy meeting this person and not be selfishly thinking how they'd be a good guest.
Exactly. I've definitely had that same sort of thought process in my head about the conflict between the two. How have you grown the show? What do you do to publicize it? Is it word of mouth, or does Voice America help? What do you think has led to the growth?
Voice America, absolutely a phenomenal partner. They have helped to promote it. And then honestly, we leverage the guests tremendously. Yeah. We always encourage them to promote it. And then we just use all of our digital assets, that we leverage today, emails, our website, all of the social media that we do. LinkedIn is probably like the number one way in which we've really been able to grow. And, it's fun to collaborate with other podcasters, like yourself. There's another group called CPG Guys, and they've been around now for I think almost 2 years. Yeah. And they focus on all that is CPG. Yeah. And so they've had me on as a guest. I've had them on as a guest, and so on. And, but yeah, it just, it's been so well received because you can listen to a podcast at your own convenience. Right. Right. And we learned quickly that, when we were scheduling Zoom events or, learning programs and it's at X hour, most people were listening to it later. They weren't able to engage. And they wanted that option, to listen to the recording. And so that's where we, tried it out, and, and it's been a great new channel and way to engage. Yeah. I mean, certainly the one benefit is, you say, you can do it at your own time, but you also can do it in more places, right? I talk to people who listen to podcasts while they work out, while they're in the car on a long drive. And so it's got that, and, just the seamlessness of being able, in particular, to, get it on your phone and connect that to like your car audio so you could listen to it in your car. That certainly has to help, boost audience. So, all right. So I have to ask you, have you listened to yourself yet? I go back and personally kind of edit down all of the episodes, and then I give it to the production company to work on, and they put the finishing touches on things. But it helps me. What I find, and I also get transcripts from them, and so I do the discussion. I rewatch the discussion, and then I read the transcript of the discussion. And the one benefit of that is that by the time that's all done, like, I remember the discussions pretty well, right? And what I talked about with each person and what was unique about their story. And so, it's time consuming. I don't know whether I'll be able to keep doing that forever, but it's a way to really help me internalize the lessons that I get from these discussions. So, absolutely. And I love what you're focused on. I think back on there's just been so many times in my career where others have stepped up or,
Yeah.
Advocated or sponsored or provided just advice and guidance. And so I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Go back to your beginnings. You were at Northwestern, you studied economics, right? And how did you sort of think about your immediate post-college path, which ultimately led, back to Harvard to get your MBA and then into the retail world?
It was funny at the time, like the job to get, this was like back, 300 years ago, was Arthur Andersen.
Yeah.
And I didn't end up getting that offer.
That's one way you really date yourself, is when you talk about wanting to get a job at Arthur Andersen.
No. But what I did end up getting, and it was the perfect way to start, my career journey, and it's advice that I try and give, anytime anybody seeks my advice. But it was a structured 6-month leadership management training program. And it was for American President lines. And you worked your way through every single department and division, within it. And it's an international shipping company, but it's both international and domestic transportation services. And so you worked at the rail yard, you worked, in the truck depot, you worked, on the docks, where the vessels were, you worked in finance, you worked in marketing and sales and, you name it. And for me, it was perfect because I had no clue what I wanted to do. And I had no clue what I thought I would enjoy and be good at. And those two naturally go hand in hand. And literally wanted to start in a sales position. You either went into sales or operations after you graduated the training program, and there were no sales opportunities open. And so I took a job as a truck dispatcher at the truck depot in the rail yard. And it was the best thing I could have ever done. It humbled me. I needed to be humbled. And it taught me, the inner workings of just the whole operation, right? Of the whole company. And so eventually a sales job opened up probably about a year and a half later, and I snatched it and loved it. And therein, I stayed with, it was American President companies in total by the time I left, because they had expanded divisions. But I was in sales roles then for like the next 7 years, and just, worked my way around selling different types of transportation services in different markets. But absolutely, from a career advice perspective, seek a company that has that has a structured training program.
Yeah.
Because particularly when you're fresh out of college, you're not as knowledgeable or as experienced as you probably should be. And when you find a company that's willing to invest in developing your knowledge and your skills through a variety of experiences, you want that company that's going to give you a nice long and wide runway.
Right.
Typically, if there's a training program and then a rotation program,
right,
that's a strong sign that you're in good hands. So for me, I did that, and I loved it. I loved selling. I was good at it. And I watched my husband apply to go to business school, and we moved to Boston. I opened up a sales office for the company. At that point, he was a first year, and watched him having the time of his life, meeting all these incredible people from all over the world, and just learning, just far more significantly than you could ever imagine from like a strategic perspective, an analytic perspective. And so I quietly applied in case I didn't get in. And I luckily got in. And so I ended up then going and getting my MBA as well.
Yeah.
We were broke for 3 years. And then we both became consultants. And so Michael went to McKinsey. I went to A.T. Kearney. I was in their transportation and logistics practice. I got to move over and work in Asia. Loved being abroad. Did not love being a consultant.
Yeah.
was not a good consultant. I was a manager. I was an operator. And so I ended up staying just shy of 2 years. And then my journey began with Staples and, landed a job at Staples. Michael was still at McKinsey. His job took us to London, and Staples graciously transferred my offer from Boston to London. And then we lived and worked in Europe, primarily in London, for 2 years. And I was part of the European retail team for Staples. So I was the marketing comptroller for stores in England and Germany. Loved that job. Just that was where I loved sales, but I truly loved marketing. I'm that servant leader where I know it all starts and ends with the customer. That's what really inspires me.
Yeah.
And that would be another piece of advice that I would give, which is, you need to be inspired by your mission, by your customer, by your product or service. And if you're not, how can you ever be, satisfied with what you're doing? How can you ever love what you're doing? And how can you ever be good at it?
Yeah.
And so for me, I learned a couple of times later, like, yeah, this was not working for me. Time to move.
Yeah.
So I was with Staples for 10 years. They eventually brought me back here in Chicago, worked for one of their recent acquisitions, Quill, and continued to do marketing, but primarily digital marketing. And so I played the lead role in helping them to build out their whole digital, strategy and platform and experience. Ultimately moved over to Discover because they needed somebody to come in and scrap and rebuild their whole digital world. But that was the point where my first 6 years loved it. My 7th year fell out of love, and I knew it was time to move on. And so I took some time off and found my next gig, chased a title, wanted to be a chief marketing officer. So don't chase titles, don't chase salaries, don't chase titles. Did not do the appropriate research. And that ended up just being the wrong role and wrong organization for me.
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving, but when every door closes, another one opens. And that's when I found NextUP.
What was it that wasn't a good fit for you in that organization? What was it that changed for you in your last year at Discover?
It was the culture.
Yeah.
It was the culture. I ironically at Discover in that last year, and I'd had, incredible bosses up to that point, had, learned a whole new industry. I'd known nothing, about financial services, the credit card industry. But the first boss who brought me in invested in my education. The next 2 bosses invested in continuing to develop me as a leader. But that final boss in a review, I got told that I was too nice, I was too motherly, and I was told that I was wearing too bright of colors. And that I would never be a successful executive leader because of those 2 dynamics at play. So 3 months later, I was out. I left.
Yeah.
And then in the second situation, it was the real estate industry. And, you got to eat nails for breakfast when you're in the real estate industry.
That's a tough business.
And you know what? I don't really care for nails.
Yeah.
A nice plate of scrambled eggs and fruit sounds good to me. So there, it wasn't the right role or situation for me. And, there were a number of other people who'd been tremendously successful through the years, and it was the right role and situation and organization for them. It just wasn't right for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine that you're getting to apply all of those things in what you're doing now, right? Go back to your logistics piece. There's a certain amount of logistics management in what you do in terms of the events that you put on, right?
Absolutely.
But it's certainly the digital piece in particular.
Absolutely.
You were well positioned to lead a company into the virtual world that we all went into at the beginning of the pandemic in particular, right?
It's been interesting, and that to your point, each one of these experiences clearly I've picked up leadership skills that for the most part transcend time, right?
Yeah.
Shifting dynamics. Some of them, like the best move I made was when I was at Quill, the division of Staples. The then president said, "Hey, we've got this crazy thing called a website on the World Wide Web, and I'm not really sure what it does. Staples is now telling us we need to grow it. I'm giving you this project."
Yeah. Well, good timing.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. It was 1999.
Yeah.
And I said, "You appreciate I know nothing." He's like, "You'll figure it out. You're hardworking, you're bright." And again, a common theme that, Staples Discover also had this philosophy of, move people around, challenge them, give them new and different adventures, and you want to look for that company that is willing to rotate you, and you can be provided this long and wide, runway. But that, I would argue, was the best move I've made in my career. Above all my degrees and, whatever. That was the best move I made because it was on the early end, or, early
Absolutely.
beginning of, when the World Wide Web, turned into the internet, and companies started building out e-commerce or e-business. And then they eventually did mobile, and then they did social media. And, so I was on the early end of that journey. And then I was able to, not only through Quill, but then through Discover, because at Discover, I went in and built out our mobile platform with my team. And then we built out our social media platforms with our team. So it was on that early end, and it was such an exciting time. And, and now people live their lives and do their jobs, virtually. So
I remember back in the late 90s when you were, moving into that space and thinking, well, that's a perfect place to be because it's clear that this is the future, right?
Yeah.
And 2 years later, you had the dotcom bust come, but for somebody like a Staples with brick and mortar foundation, they could weather that out while they continued to build the online piece up, and it really played to the strengths of people who had that combined online and real presence.
I have an article clipping from the Wall Street Journal, and I think it was like 99 or 2000, but they listed the top, .com platforms, and Staples was number one.
Yeah.
Amazon was down there somewhere.
Yeah, they recovered.
We were like, Quill was halfway down the list. And if you think about the size, at that point in time, gosh, when I started, it was 29 million in sales. And by the time I left, it was like 800 million. Staples clearly was on the leading edge.
Yeah.
Leading edge. And I remember too that Land's End was known as like the technical guru. Like they were the ones that first did live chat. They were the one, they tried all of the new digital tools on their platform. And I would drag my team up on a road trip, and we'd go up and visit Land's End and, and brainstorm, with their group, because we didn't compete.
So I'm going to turn and ask you a question that I asked Michael when I talked to him. At what point did you feel like you really had yourself figured out, and what energized you and what you wanted to do professionally?
I don't think I have myself figured out yet, because I probably have at least another adventure or two in me.
Yeah.
But I did figure out what energizes me. Absolutely, leading teams, being engaged, with team members, bottom up, top down, right?
Yeah.
Growing and building, every now and then you got to rebuild. But what truly energizes me is growing and building and scaling, teams, products, companies. Absolutely. As I mentioned before, I'm a servant leader. And so I am truly inspired by how we serve our customer, our client, our member, our partner. And so that's why I think I've always enjoyed, roles in marketing teams and in sales teams, engaging in customer service. Those I think would be the three core takeaways for me.
Yeah.
And so as I've looked at each job thereafter, that clearly, has been like three key criteria. I guess I would add a fourth, which is the culture's got to be right too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I learned, twice where I didn't have the right type of culture dynamics. And I was so blessed and fortunate that I was, in a family that I could afford to take the time off to find the right next adventure.
Yeah.
And I humbly appreciate not everybody gets to do that, but I so appreciate that it's key. And so now as a leader, I'm trying to do all I can to make it the right culture. And it was particularly challenging these last couple of years.
Yeah, I would imagine particularly, you're in an organization that's focused on women. Women have been leaving the workforce. They're not coming back. It's probably put a lot of pressure on what you're doing, to try and figure out how to reverse some of the things that have happened that just don't seem to be reverting to whatever normal is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The she session, the great resignation, and now the great recovery. That's what we're trying to call it. And next up, and you're right, it was just devastating. The impact and the challenge that, women faced both domestically and globally. The McKinsey Lean-In study shared that in the first year of COVID alone, women lost 5 years of progress.
Which is just incredible.
Domestically, of any advancement that they had made. The global stats, 34 years. 34 years. In that first year alone.
Wow.
And so much of it was, work and life collided and we were able to, easily compartmentalize before. But the good news in all of this is that you see so many leaders now in companies that are focused on, okay, how do I transform the norm? I get it. Like I need to facilitate remote working. I need to facilitate flexible hours. I need to provide more than just mental, vision and dental. I need to provide caregiving. I need to provide mental health. You just see so many more dynamic approaches to how, leaders and companies can serve their employees. And that's a lot of what we've been covering in all of the podcasts.
You talked about culture a minute ago. What do you do to create the kind of culture that you want to have in the organization?
So for me, I'm very big on being approachable, and I made this a practice throughout the years in my career that I did a whole lot of skip levels.
Yeah.
So, I want to meet with every single member of the team if I can. At one point I had a team that was over 500. So that wasn't necessarily happening at an individual level, but I would go to the call centers and then meet, do just a mass meeting, because I wanted to make myself available. And more importantly, to be there to be appreciative and thank those that are truly making it happen. Right. That are bringing the mission to life. So approachability is definitely one of them. Humility is another, wherein, when there's a screw up, it all ladders back to me. And when there's a celebration or success or acknowledgement, or kudos, it goes to the team. And, always want to make sure that I'm saying thank you as much as I can, because I appreciate, just how hard people work. I would think the other thing too, and, I like to have a good laugh. I like to have fun. And so I try to lighten the mood where I can, in any type of meeting. We are here to deliver impact and value. So we need to be responsible and professional and get that job done and serve our members and partners. and our mission, most importantly, but it doesn't mean you can't have a whole lot of fun either. And so I try to have a lot of fun, and it, we, as many others did, we came up with some really crazy kind of social activities that can be done virtually. And thank God now we're back in person.
Yeah. How much are you doing in person yourself?
So we are a fully remote based organization. Now we've got 35 people total in my HQ team, and we're spread across the United States. So all of most of our group and team meetings are Zoom, they're virtual. Right. And then once a quarter, we try to get the whole team together so we can be together for at least a couple of days in person. And then from a regional and partnership perspective, prior to COVID, I was traveling like at least 2 to 3 weeks out of every month, because I would go and visit any one of our 22 regions, go visit corporate partners. Now I probably travel a total of like a week a month.
Yeah.
Not everyone's welcoming everybody back. They're limiting who's in their facility so they can keep them safe and healthy. And our regions, albeit before they would do 90% of their programming, face-to-face events, now it's probably about 50-50.
Yeah.
And so there aren't as many, in-person regional events to go to. But like, for example, next week I'm headed to Phoenix. We have a leadership development program that we're kicking off. The first week of it's in person. The rest of it will be, virtual. And then I'm going to visit one of our partners, PetSmart, and then I'm going to go to a regional event that night. So it's starting to pick back up a little, but our take is it's not going to ever pick back up to the pace it was before, because corporate partners just aren't there. Yeah. And in a good number of cases, they're not necessarily willing now to fund travel. So wherein people used to be able to travel and come to an event or a program, a number of corporate, partners realized the savings that could be realized when nobody was having to travel, and they built that into their, P&L. So
right. So we're going to run out of time. Any final thoughts or career advice you want to give to our listeners?
Gosh, yeah, no. I would say the two I would share would be, if your dreams don't scare you, they're just not big enough.
Okay.
Which means take risks, right? Find that company that's willing to take that risk on you and take that risk. And I did it a number of times. I was so fortunate I had people investing in me. And then the second would be network, and network. You cannot underestimate the value of your personal and professional network. And you realize just how important it is when you don't have it and you need it. And that actually, when I looked to change my career the first time, I realized how little of a network I had.
Yeah.
And I definitely started to learn to invest in it. And now it's so easy to do virtually.
Yeah. Well, LinkedIn's made it.
Yeah.
It's almost unforgivable not to have a network now, because it's so much easier than it used to be.
Right. Yeah. So but thank you so much for having me join you today. Love your show. So much more we could cover, but there's a time limit. So I appreciate the time, Sarah. Yeah, it's great to catch up. Pleasure. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
If you're ready to take control of your career, visit pathwise.io. If you'd like more regular career insights, sign up on the website for the Pathwise newsletter and follow Pathwise on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Career Sessions, Career Lessons. We hope the nuggets of wisdom shared today help guide your path to the successful career of your dreams. This podcast series is part of Pathwise.io, which is here to help you live the career you want. We provide a comprehensive mix of career and professional development events, insights, tools, and exercises backed by a group of leading coaches and other career management experts. If you aspire to something more or just something different in your career, Join us at pathwise.io. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. See you again on the next episode.